Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we probably will have a few trickle in, but I'm Emma Tinsley with the O4W Business Association. A lot of you probably know me and probably recognize Matthew as well from our quarterly meeting a few weeks ago, where we had him do a short presentation on the advocacy effort for Beltline Rail. We invited him to do a more in-depth conversation because we know this is such an important topic for our neighborhood, and knowing that the Old Fourth Ward will probably be one of the first neighborhoods impacted by the expansion of rail, starting with the expansion of the streetcar along Edgewood and Auburn and Irwin Avenues. So we are super excited to be joined today by the crew from Beltline Rail Now to have just a more in-depth conversation, and there'll be lots of times for question and answer as well. I believe the meeting is being recorded, and so we will also post this on our website, so y'all can review it at any time, or if you want to go back and hear something you missed. So thank you so much for joining us. I will introduce Matthew Rao with Beltline Rail Now. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being here today and being willing to go into a little bit more detail. I know there's lots of details to dive into.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Emma. Today is Earth Day, and I can't imagine a better thing to be talking about than light rail on the Beltline and in the Fourth Ward neighborhood on Earth Day. The Beltline is a forward-thinking project in its entirety, a greenway, a pedestrian trail. It's designed for people's health, for a linear park, for art, for community, for equity, for connection, for unity. It's so many of the things that we celebrate on Earth Day, and it just happened that today would be the right day to expand our conversation with you. As Emma said, I'm Matthew Rao. I chair Beltline Rail Now. I'm gonna start our presentation. We have slides for you, and just give me a thumbs up, Emma, if you can see the slideshow. All right, so this presentation is, here's my contact info. If you want to snap a shot of this, record it so that we can communicate directly later about questions you still have, or what you might like to do to explore or advance something you learned about tonight or already had on your mind and felt called to do it after tonight's meeting. I'm going to start with a little bit of history about us. We are an advocacy group. We are not affiliated with any other group. We are not populated by employees of MARTA, ABI, technology companies that have an interest in the outcome of the Beltline. We are truly a grassroots group. We were formed in 2018 by Beltline creator Ryan Gravel and former City Council President Kathy Woolard, in response really to the first More MARTA plan. If you guys recall, More MARTA was a tax referendum that the City of Atlanta voters passed in 2016 by 71% to pay a half penny more in our sales tax to fund the More MARTA program, which was a list of projects where Beltline Rail figured prominently. That first pass at More MARTA left 2/3 of the Beltline without any rail service, and we formed at that time. The project is 20 years old almost. This summer it will be 20 years since Ryan and Kathy Woolard and Mayor Franklin first started presenting the idea, and not a single mile of track has been laid. We're getting a trail, we're getting landscaping, we're getting huge amount of development, and we're not getting the reason for the project, the mass transit that was at the center of the idea. Why not? Or why? We'll explore that tonight. Our mission is to promote affordability, accessibility, sustainability, and I would add, I should put in this slide, equity, in Atlanta by accelerating the timeline of construction of rail on the Beltline. We're not, and I think this is important as a distinction. Beltline Rail Now is an advocacy group, but we didn't invent any of this, and we're not asking for anything new. We're asking for a commitment to build and an acceleration of what is already planned to be. I think that's really important. And we've set a goal to enroll others in, which is to complete this project in its entirety by 2035. That's just under 15 years from now. It is doable. Just to refresh everyone's memory, what is the Beltline? Where is the Beltline? This is from ABI, Atlanta Beltline Inc.'s website. And this is the Beltline, 22 miles in roughly a circle, touching 45 neighborhoods and communities in our city, connecting some of the city's largest assets, parks, and connecting or crossing, we'll talk about the connecting, the MARTA rail system in 4 places. Over here on the west side, over here on the south side, over here on the east side, right at the doorstep of Old Fourth Ward, and over here on the northeast side near Lindbergh Center. What is more MARTA? More MARTA is what's shown on this map. This is what MARTA sold us on in 2016 when we voted. And this map here is the final list of more MARTA projects. G on this map over here on the right, this is this is you guys in Old Fourth Ward, or just to the, between G and the end of the Streetcar, that's you in Old Fourth Ward. And so where it says LRT, that's light rail. Where it says BRT, that's bus rapid transit. And those 3 lines also connect and are part of this whole conversation and also impact Old Fourth Ward. Where did we begin? We began with the Atlanta Streetcar with light rail in this city. And whatever you think of it, and its many failings, it is the beginning for light rail in the city of Atlanta. And yet the vision is still much bigger. That streetcar system would connect to rail on the Beltline, operating in a green track bed, planted with grass or other ground covers that grow well in our climate. In the parts, it will run in the street like it does presently. And then it can reflect the most modern technology available, including, I love this, is just a little inspiration shot for the latest in light rail technology out of France. The Beltline is really about promoting some central ideas. It's about affordability. It's about making density possible. The city of Atlanta is going to double in population in the next 25 to 30 years. In fact, it's going to more than double. Where are these people going to live? It's projected, and this is not Beltline rail statistic, it's statistics we found, that 22% of the city of Atlanta population will live in the Beltline TAD corridor by that time. So you do the math, 22% of 1.2 million people is almost the size of a city. It's 250,000 people or more. So when we have the Beltline rail promoting the distribution of the impact, the value, and also the benefits around the entire circle, so that pockets that have been beneficial don't remain the only pockets that are, that we spread it around and we touch every corner of the city. Accessibility. This is about accessibility of people to places. It's also about accessibility of all kinds of people to mass transit. People who are older, people who are younger, people who can't drive, people who don't want to drive, people who who are in some way recovering from an injury or not well, people who just want to get out of the rain. It's about all of that. It's also about sustainability. And on Earth Day, we want to talk just a little bit, because the light rail technology for the Beltline is all electric. Once we have a fully green electric grid in Georgia, that means that light rail is an entirely zero emissions product, and that can carry a lot of people. And finally, and not last but on this list, but really not least, it's really first, is equity. This is about spreading the benefit of mass transit around the entire city, so that all communities here share equally in first-class mass transit solutions. where I wanted to answer particularly for tonight, what's in it for you guys and how are you guys connected in the old Fourth Ward to the Beltline and to Beltline Rail? You will be first, because the first thing to be built of the Beltline Rail project, that G that I showed you in the map before, is the extension of the downtown streetcar via Edgewood Avenue and then to Krog Street Market at Irwin Street, and then up the Beltline about 1.5 miles to Ponce City Market at Ponce de Leon. This is the first. MARTA began site surveying in the street and on the Beltline last October. Their schedule is for stakeholder engagement this year, and they wanted to get to 30% design engineering and ready for build by February of next year. You guys are, again, the first neighborhood that will benefit. You become the connector neighborhood. I think the streetcar has been a failure for you, and the Beltline has been a failure for you in terms of business, because it's just a bridge too far and it doesn't connect enough of the places that might benefit you. People on the Beltline aren't going to walk all the way to Jackson Street or Boulevard even. It's just a little beyond what people will do to walk to something. But when they are arriving down Edgewood Avenue, straight through the heart of the old Fourth Ward business district, there will be people coming from that Ponce area, people going to it. And they will have a chance to stop, get off the train, and do business with you. It's 0.5 mile to the Beltline, and that's just a little bit too far. The current streetcar had a lot of problems, both in the implementation. I think you guys were torn up for way too long, and a lot of businesses had difficulty weathering the construction, but it can also be improved in how it's operated and how it's done. And I won't get into all of those details now, but you guys, in speaking up for that, will go a long way to see that those improvements, like frequency, like priority over cars, like not waiting behind traffic. All of those things need to happen, signalization, and they can help the delivered product. You've got a 5-mile-an-hour streetcar that's slower than walking, and there's no reason that speed can't be increased with the right measures. And then finally, something we'll get to tonight is the potential infill station at Hulsey Yard, just at the edge of Fourth Ward, and a new connection point to MARTA. MARTA CEO Jeff Parker said recently the Beltline would only be successful with connections to MARTA, and he's right about that, and we're all for that. And the way to do it is to develop those infill stations, chief among them Hulsey Yard. You are the first more MARTA project, as I've said, but MARTA doesn't want to give that to service for 7 more years. 2027 or 2028 is what they've published. We think, and then there's a similarly long timeline for the rest of the Beltline projects that follow. There is no complete Beltline, even the J that we'll talk about, until 2045 or later. Why? There are possible financial explanations. MARTA wants to bank the money and not really borrow money. They want to count on a future federal funding plan that they haven't yet developed, or they just want to spend the money elsewhere. We're not exactly sure, and we're not here to offer information about that. We have asked for explanations, and we plan to be briefed by MARTA in the near future on that and other things. We released a funding blueprint in January, and a lot of you have seen that document, and it gives Atlanta and MARTA a different way to look at funding transit, and in particular Beltline Rail. It was coincidental that we released this at the very moment the SSD proposal was released, and that's actually how, Emma, you and I met when that was really hot and heavy, and we were invited by 2 of your members to attend a meeting that you had called on that topic. Also going on now is a feasibility study, and that's the word that's used. Those aren't my words or Beltline Rail Now's words. Those are MARTA's words about the east line from Lindbergh all the way to Inman Park. And we're not sure exactly what the goal of that feasibility study is. We would expect at this point MARTA having selected light rail as the preferred alternative 3 separate times and done a tier 1 environmental impact statement for the entire Beltline with it, that what they would be talking about is engineering solutions, and maybe in fact they are, but their language and how they've cast it so far leaves us wondering what the goal of the study is in its entirety. There are other impacts to you. In the short term, perhaps a connection to Inman Park, Reynoldstown Station at MARTA, but also ultimately the Hulsey Yard Master Plan and the Hulsey Yard Infill Station. And I keep coming back to that. I mean, there's still a rail yard there. The CSX Railway still owns it, but we know from their prior behavior, such as at Tilford, that they won't stay in the rail yard business in dense urban environments forever, and that eventually that property will have another use. And many of you may have been involved in the process itself 2 years ago. It was one of the most amazing public processes I've ever seen. And graciously, your neighbor, my friend, our former Beltline Rail Now volunteer, Brandon Sutton, is here with us tonight to give the next part of this presentation, which has to do with just what happened at Hulsey Yard and how it might impact the Fourth Ward. Brandon, I give it.
Thank you, Matthew, and appreciate everyone joining us tonight. My name is Brandon Sutton. I've lived in Cabbagetown for 20 years now, actually. It's 20 years ago last month. And back in late 2018, just to give a little context, well, for many, many years, I lived at the Saks Lofts, and for many years, there's been conjecture over what's going to happen with Hulsey Yard. Will CSX ever sell the yard? And you can go back through the history on the internet and forums and whatnot. People saying, "Oh, they'll never leave. It'll never stop. It's it's too valuable. This, that, and the other." And no one really knew, but we sensed the neighborhoods. People were getting more eager to understand what was possible when and if Hulsey Yard was converted. So sometime around late 2018, I got involved with the group that was developing a master plan for Hulsey Yard. It was representatives from Cabbagetown, Reynoldstown, Inman Park, and Old Fourth Ward that came together and ultimately self-funded, I might add, this master planning process that went for several months, most of the year in 2019. We had no idea at the time that the yard was actually going to go inactive in the middle of the planning process. So we had our first public input meeting about 5 days after the yard went inactive. So it's quite fortuitous for us because this thing that people had thought would never happen, all of a sudden, whoa, the yard just was empty one day. So, we talk a lot about the impacts on the Beltline, the impacts on MARTA. It's important to look at the map that you see on the screen and sort of understand context. The stretch between the King Memorial Station and the Inman Park Reynoldstown Station is one of the longest in the system. It's the longest on the east side. So there's this big gap in the system, and Hulsey sits basically right in the middle of that gap. And we can get into details later if you'd like. MARTA has studied the potential for this infill station for years, so it's not a pipe dream. This has been studied quite extensively. So Hulsey sits right in the middle. It's where the Beltline crosses Hulsey Yard. It's a critical point. In the neighborhood input session, by the way, we had about 1,000 people that came out to these sessions over the course of several months in 2019. And when we were talking about connectivity and mobility, MARTA Rail Infill was listed as the number 3 priority for the community. So again, this was something that came up again and again and again. And I want to emphasize that when these discussions were being had, we had different models where people were able to play around with the different pieces of the model and place things where they think they should go. All of the models that were developed, there was a sort of a baked-in understanding or an expectation that Beltline transit would just be part of the equation once Hulsey Yard did in fact convert. And obviously the connection, as you see on the left, this left circle is the potential infill station. The blue line is the Beltline, including Beltline transit. On the right circle shows a potential spur extension to the Inman Park MARTA station. So either way, whatever happens at Hulsey, if they do an infill station or they don't do an infill station, there's going to be a critical connection point from Beltline Transit to MARTA, whether it's an infill station or a spur trail to the Emmett Park MARTA station. So this was one of the 3 framework plans. You can see on the left, that was the model that, that's Matt Cherry. He was the chief architect that worked on this plan. But all 3 of the framework plans included Beltline Transit. They all included connection to either the MARTA station that exists or the infill station represented on the left. One thing I'll mention that surprised, I think, a lot of people. If you notice the different colors that are represented in those blocks, the lighter purples indicate lower density. The darker purples indicate greater density. We showed greater density on the right because there is an existing MARTA station there. I think what surprised a lot of people through the process is how much the neighborhoods were actually supportive of density when paired with transit. That was a really critical piece. If there were to be an infill station there at Krog, where you see that circle on the left, there would likely be even more density in those squares there on the left. MARTA did seem quite excited about the potential. I think the process surprised a lot of people that have done planning because of the level of public engagement and the thoughtfulness of the input that came. So there does seem to be a pretty high appetite for more density paired with transit and proper connectivity through the site. So that is a quick and dirty. Matthew, is there anything else you wanted to? Yeah, thank you. I wanted to show this slide because it really highlights that Beltline and Beltline Transit and connectivity to MARTA was, again, central to the conversation. So these fundamentals that came out of this, several months, probably 6-7 months of planning, these were the 3 of the main priorities: preserving the Beltline corridor, advancing Beltline rail, and integrating with MARTA. So this is all from the public input. This isn't something that a group of planners dreamed up. This was what the public wants. This is what us as neighbors and community leaders have said, hey, this is what we will support when this site does in fact transition. So do we have anything else, Matthew? That was it. Yeah, just more on the infill station, talking about how it basically unlocks the full potential of the site. There was even talk about an intermodal station at the Emmett Park Reynoldstown station. There could be potential for passenger rail because there is a main rail line that will go through the site regardless. So there's a lot of potential there if we actually design for moving people around the most efficient way and not just for cars. And I hand it back to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Brandon. That was just awesome. I think it's really what I take away so much, other than that Old Fourth Ward is right at the front door of what will eventually happen at Hulsey Yard, is that you guys engage so many people in the process. 1,000 people. If you want to compare how many people were engaged by ABI down at Murphy Crossing last fall, you probably engaged 7 or 8 times the number of people that they did. And that's not because, I think it just speaks to how a public engagement process can capture the imagination of and the participation of the people who have a stakeholder interest, and that their interest, that you can reach consensus about something if you go through the right process. And so really thank you for doing this and joining us. I took those pictures of several people, and including Matt, at the one of the presentations you guys made down at the public center in Reynoldstown or on the south side there. And it was just amazing to see the energy come together. I'm curious if you want to say something about what was the reception that MARTA gave to you regarding an infill station. Do you want to say anything more about that? Because you had a meeting with a high-level person at MARTA.
We did. We had a meeting. It was actually a lot of people at MARTA. I want to say it was about 10 people that were in the meeting. they seemed particularly interested in the potential. Again, at the time, as reflected in some of the documents that you've shared and will no doubt share later in the question and answer, Hulsey has traditionally been this almost mythic property that, maybe someday in far off Never Land might convert to another use. But when the intermodal traffic stopped, when the yard was empty, I think everyone that has ever thought about the potential of this and the potential of Beltline connectivity in MARTA really looked up and went, wow, it actually happened. Now we know that they've reactivated the yard for a much more limited use. It's a vastly different use case than it was previously. MARTA was definitely eager to understand what the potential was, and how they were particularly interested in the density conversation. They're looking for obviously ways to have density around MARTA stations, and this provided yet another example of how there was an opportunity for more density with public support. I think that's the really key point. There's generally a lot of tension around density in neighborhoods, but when developed properly, you have to sort of underline that and put asterisks on both sides. When developed properly, this site sort of has all of the ingredients that makes density make sense and gets support from the community. So MARTA definitely took notice of that and seemed quite interested.
I think that's important, especially in the conversation we're having now. MARTA will hold a big media event tomorrow at the other end of the Beltline at Monroe and 10th Street, the first of perhaps several media events. We're not sure exactly what it's going to be, but the press will all be there as they explain the difficulties they face and the possible solutions for them, we hope, for actually bridging these gaps. And I would imagine that if they get a good crowd of reporters tomorrow, they'll do the same thing down in Hulsey Yard eventually. So where are we today? And thanks again, Brandon. Today, we are looking at a 2050 or beyond timeline, and we find that unacceptable. Unacceptable for a city 20 years into this project to be contemplating 30 more to get it done. It's just not that big. There have been difficulties. Number one, the reduced tax income into the TAD, the tax allocation district from the Great Recession, and also the downward pressure on revenue and ridership that every single transit agency has experienced during the pandemic. But we know, we can see the end of the pandemic. We can also almost smell the end of the pandemic. And it's going to happen, and people are going to need public transportation again and feel confident in riding it. And we think that transit will come back and rebound. The other situation we have now is we've had a mayor and a city council that have provided really little direction to encouragement for or oversight of MARTA. They're not really advocating for you, the people that voted for this tax, we, the people who are paying the tax. MARTA is deciding kind of behind a veil what the priorities ought to be and when they ought to happen. And finally, the trail-only approach that has only accelerated with the passage of the SSD to complete it is fueling displacement at an increasing rate. It's reducing the likelihood that we'll ever get a Beltline rail project because some things will become too late as they develop. The original vision of the Beltline as a way to curb traffic, to enable a life without a car, to promote green development of Atlanta can't happen without the mass transit. In fact, no developer in his right or her right mind would build without sufficient parking if there is no mass transit solution. So we've got to get going with this or it will be too late. Where are we headed? And this is what Beltline Rail is up to. We are promoting election of council members and a mayor who place a high priority on the rail project and who will say so and act on that commitment. What's happened since we've been talking, you and I, Emma, on this, is that the federal infrastructure bill that has emerged is giving Atlanta a huge opportunity. That's because from the president to the secretary of transportation, to our senators, to our Congresswoman, Nikema Williams, we have people aligned who are in a position to make sure that Atlanta and the Beltline in particular get a share of that infrastructure money. We are headed towards pushing to have that first segment through the 4th Ward onto Pond City Market completed within 3 years. And the J, which is from that More MARTA map, all of the More MARTA part of the Beltline can be completed by 2030, and the rest, this entire loop, by 2035. And who's going to ultimately decide that is you. It is the mayor, it is the city council, but who those individuals are up to you. You have representatives right now, and you can ask them about their stand, about what they're going to do. You can join our mailing list, visit our website, you can donate money, but most importantly, the thing you can do is to engage. And right now we're kind of reaching the end of the presentation part, and we're going to have the town hall forum part. And I'd love to hear questions, and I think we want to have something that resembles a conversation here. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. And the way you do that is in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You will find a participants window or a reactions window on the bottom right. And in there, you just raise your hand and I'll see it and call on you. And then you can unmute yourself. So thank you for your attention tonight and for joining us on Earth Day. And I'll open the floor to comments and questions.
Hey, Matthew, just want to let you know there are a couple typed questions in the chat box.
In the chat. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Beth.
Sure.
So
I'm Brian.
Brian, I'll read your question to the group and then why don't you say something more about it? Brian is from Capitol View and he had a few questions about light rail. Number one, the T-SPLOST that was approved a few years ago, what happened to the money? Number two, who would explore the options from the American Rescue Plan and see if anything can help with the process? And number three, if we give MARTA options to execute the projects, who would be responsible to adopt it and put the plan into action? Brian, you want to say a little more about your question?
Well, it was more than those. I had two more.
Oh, I see number four. There's number four. The $100 million goal to finish the trail that the city council approved recently. What is the plan for it? Can the residual go to light rail? And number five, have we explored other light rail options? I saw an article recently about additional possibilities for light rail, which is half less than the current plan. Maybe, Brian, I'd like to start with your last question first.
Okay.
The $100 million SSD. What we found so limiting about that was the fact that its usage is restricted to the trail and paving it. And that if there is a residual, it does not go to light rail or any other infrastructure. If there is a residual, they discontinue, they sunset the tax early. That's my understanding. So what we had promoted in the run up to the SSD was an enlargement of it. And there's technically no prohibition of enlarging it or revoting on the rules later. But as it's structured now, no, the answer to the question is no. Could you say some, I think I understand the second part of this question, number five, which is other light rail options. And I wonder what the article you are mentioning refers to. And when you say half, do you mean half the cost or half of the mileage, or what are you asking?
Well, yeah, it was a recent article. I'm digging it up right now and I'm gonna post it in the chat. But it was other options as to I'm looking through it right now, but it was another light rail options. And it was a fraction of the cost as to what is being proposed right here. But give me a few minutes. I'm looking through it now. I'm posting in here. But I felt that maybe, we put it out there, because I was thinking maybe we do homework for them. Then they'll say, oh, okay, well, yeah, we did our homework. And, maybe this is something to look at. and maybe this is something to adopt, So that was why I mentioned that article. So give me a few minutes, I'll post it in the chat.
And while you do that, I will say what I know about that. So light rail is the locally preferred alternative. This is an official term, and it has been selected as the locally preferred alternative on 3 separate occasions. And who did that was MARTA. The other things evaluated were no building at all, bus rapid transit, and in light rail, 2 different versions of that, modern streetcar, which is what I showed you that we have downtown. There are all kinds of new developments in technology. What we're talking though is a green rail bed with fixed guideway rail and a vehicle operating on that. The capacity for it is one of the reasons. The rider experience is another. The fact that the Beltline can remain green, and that the relatively narrow corridor that the transit occupies doesn't have to get wider as it would with any sort of technology that requires rubber tires and pavement. So those are all factors in selecting the LPA. What I would say as chair of this group is that that's all done, and that what we need is transit now, and that revisiting it doesn't help bring that, and that the cost of waiting, the cost of displacement, the cost of people not able to access their life or their jobs, the lack of affordable housing, that's what we really want to start solving, and we want to solve it sooner rather than later. Because whether we build anything on the Beltline or not, we are going to have continued gentrification of our in-town neighborhoods, increase in traffic, and a further pollution of our air that we all breathe. I don't know who would explore the options from the American Rescue Plan. I do know that in the infrastructure bill, there's $85 billion for transit, including light rail, and that there are other pockets of money in the infrastructure plan that could impact places like Fourth Ward, money for sidewalks, money for bridges and connecting things that were separated by freeways and redlining years ago. So there is, I think what my message to you, Brian, and to others is that if we have the will to do this, money is not the reason we can't. The stars have never aligned better for Atlanta than they are right now. I love your question number 3. We're all about reminding MARTA of the options it's already considered, and about putting the best ones forward. And the reason I had Brandon join us tonight to talk about Hulsey Yard is that's not an option I think they're considering right now, that routing of the Beltline. At least they haven't said so. Perhaps they are. We'd love to hear if they are, and we'd be the first to say that's great that you are, if you are. But the direct route under DeKalb Avenue, under the active CSX railway, requiring an easement through the yard and connecting to the Southeast Beltline, we hope that that's an alternative they'll consider. We hope that on the other end of the east line or east side, that the Armour infill station will be one they consider, as well as Boone and Murphy Crossing on the other 2 parts of the Beltline. The T-Splost is an interesting fund. I'm going to go on record tonight and just say that we will oppose any T-Splost. And the renewal is next year. We will oppose any T-Splost that is not specific and does not include money in it for Beltline infrastructure. And that means the infrastructure for rail. None of the T-Splost was not meant to be spent on that. That wasn't its purpose. It was meant to be spent on everything around that. It was, in some cases, misspent. There was money spent at Piedmont Park. There was money spent on the bridge downtown. So the money was not illegally spent. It's that the T-Splost was not defined well enough. And we have to do a better job in making sure that if we have another T-Splost on the ballot, that there is a menu of items that it will be spent on. Did I answer your questions, Brian? think that's all of them.
Yes, hold on, I'm still looking for that article.
We'll
But
see it when you post it. I wonder if someone else has a question they'd like to ask or a comment they'd like to make. Tom, is that you who does?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Right.
First of all, thanks for all you're doing relative to this. It would be exciting to see a lot more mass transit come to Atlanta. And by the way, Brandon, I think that notion of putting a stop at Hulsey Yards would be a huge idea. I'm the president of Fourth Ward Neighbors, and I can't count the number of times when we have conversations about development and it impacts parking and everybody says, but remember, in this neighborhood, we are at least 1 mile from any transit station overall. So having an infill station there, I think would be fantastic. And I actually say that whether or not it ties into the Beltline, of course, I would like it to tie into the Beltline, but just having an infill station there would be a huge idea. So first of all, that's sort of a comment, not a question. I guess my question is, I would assume, and I'm new with this, I don't have a lot of background information and all. I just went on your website a little bit and looked at it. I would assume MARTA is operating rationally with their capital. And whenever they decide to either extend tracks or put in new station, the goal must ladder up to something like it's going to increase ridership in the most efficient way possible. Something like that, right? It has to ladder up to something that benefits the overall goal of MARTA, which is to have more people riding mass transit. Why don't they think this is in their top list of proceeding with? I guess that's what I'm missing. I understand that you think it is, and I understand that that was part of the Beltline's vision, but why doesn't MARTA think that way? What are they missing, or what are you guys not communicating, so therefore they don't get the rationale? Because I don't understand it.
I'd say, Tom, I wish I had a definitive answer for you on that. We asked the question publicly, and we will ask it privately when we have that audience in the near future. What I can say is that MARTA's ridership studies for all of the more MARTA projects show the Beltline as the #1 ridership project in more MARTA, if you count all of the continuous segments together. So from a ridership standpoint, they ought to be very pleased with the Beltline and want to advance it. You may have heard Ryan Gravel speak on the subject before. He has certainly said that he's not sure that MARTA has really understood the Beltline as more than just a transit project, which it is. And that is part of the presentation here. Transit is as political as it is a construction project or an engineering project. And I think that there are probably lots of folks at MARTA who don't all agree about what the priorities ought to be. But the relationship here is that we, the city of Atlanta, through our council and our mayor and through ABI, have set a priority. We have said to MARTA, here is our money. We are handing it over to you. We have already handed over close to $250 million. We want you to build this. Do it. And it would only be speculation why they won't want to get going with that right away. When the Secretary of Transportation calls out a project like this as one that he'd like to see funded, we all ought to be scrambling, getting the I's and T's inked on an application for that money, because it won't be there forever. And those places around the country that are ready to apply for that money will get it. And we have, as I said before, we've never had a better opportunity for federal funding than we do right now.
So I guess what you're saying is, if MARTA is making decisions both on a rational, also known as it increases ridership more than anything else, as well as a political basis, then the view is clearly that political is more important than the rational side of it, because Beltline rail transit right now is losing out and continues to lose out.
Well, and all rail transit. I mean, the only rail transit project MARTA plans to build in the next 10 years is through Fourth Ward and to Ponce City Market. Everything else is, and I say everything else, the Emory Clifton Corridor, Campbellton Road, any bits of the streetcar that they decide eventually to, none of the rest of this, our 2015 streetcar plan is in more MARTA. They changed parts of it to bus rapid transit, and they are starting on the first BRT. BRT is easier to get going, especially when you already have the road to do it. And Summerhill BRT will probably be the first more MARTA project that opens. And that will be I think in 2 years that they do that. But even that's not very long, just 2 or 3 miles, and that's not very long for a BRT line. So I think that this comes back around, Tom, to they need to hear from us like they did in the run up to more MARTA. It was the public engagement they did with the people who would be paying the tax that resulted in the more MARTA plan you saw. And it was the effort of this group and others at MARTA board meetings to make sure that what was in that plan stayed in that plan. That means that the map you saw is the map they are promising to build. But we think that there are forces at work that are looking for a reason not to build it, or to pave it and put a bus line. And that, I think on Earth Day, I'd like to just emphasize what a shame that would be if that Beltline were paved for rubber tired vehicles, whatever they are.
I want to yield because I know other people have other questions. If you could somewhere in the chat or sometime just direct me or everybody to sort of a one pager which explains why we should do this. I don't feel like I am equipped today to go and rally neighbors that say, please call your ex, because these are the 3 top reasons why we need Beltline, we need light rail on the Beltline now. So if you could just direct, you don't have to answer it, but you could just direct in the chat box to something where that really succinct information is, that would be super helpful to me.
I'm going to ask my cohort, Beth, to find the link on our website with the short executive summary of the blueprint for transit funding, because I think that explains the argument and the urgency for Beltline rail the best. It's 2 pages, the front and back of a single page. It's an easy read and it's a compelling argument.
Thank you.
I think that would help you. And I appreciate you as a leader of a neighborhood organization wanting to know that.
Thank you.
And if we don't find it during the rest of the meeting, I'll make sure that we get it to Emma, who will get it out to all of you. Brian's question, I see the op-ed, a way to get transit on the Beltline. His question is about autonomous vehicles. Oh, and I do have active questions. Liliana Bakhtiari, who is running for the seat in Council District 5, has joined us. And welcome, Liliana. What is your question?
Hey, thank you, Matthew. And thanks, Brandon. Thanks to both of y'all for putting this on. I was wondering, and maybe you alluded to this, but there's been mention of MARTA in the past couple of weeks of them wanting to do some form of their own light rail. And I'm confused as to why they would want to reinvent the wheel and not partner with Beltline Rail now, or similar to like what Brian said, why there wouldn't be partnership and then pushing and then taking over it later if need be. But to me, it seems with the challenges that MARTA's had, obviously because of the, it's one of the only private transportation organizations that exists in the country. I don't understand why there isn't an opportunity for partnership to expand, given how much lower the cost of light rail is and how much faster it can be built, and why they would want to go about now, why all of a sudden they're mentioning light rail rather than working with Beltline Rail now, and why when they wouldn't want to utilize this partnership to help them expand into, say, like metro areas as well and further outside of that. So I am very confused why, and I don't know if you can speak to this because you're not MARTA, but I'm wondering what the conversations have been when partnerships have been proposed or working together, because I would assume that as MARTA's focusing on transportation, why they wouldn't want to work with Beltline Rail, given the studies you have done, given the efforts you'll have put forth, given the committees you formed. I don't quite get it.
Thanks for the question, Liliana. And what you're pointing to is sort of a nature of the relationship that the City of Atlanta, ABI, the City Council, the Mayor, and MARTA have with each other. And it's not, MARTA, in fairness to MARTA, they're not used to having partners. You know, they are a semi-autonomous organization. They are regional in nature. You know, they are as interested in what goes on in DeKalb County and Fulton County as in the city of Atlanta. And more MARTA is new for them. And the Beltline as a type of project that is not only about transit, but about other things is new for them. And so to be handed some money and say, build this, is not the way they're used to having it go, I would think. And you're right, I'm not MARTA and I don't know the answer and I don't want to speak for them. But that is the question that I hope someone in the media asks tomorrow at Monroe and 10th. It's certainly a question on my mind. We've asked for a high-level briefing. We asked for it more than 2 weeks ago, or about 2 weeks ago, and we think we'll get it within the next week. And that's the kind of question we'd like to ask. You know, there's kind of a veil. You don't get to ask questions directly at a MARTA meeting these days in the pandemic and get an answer. You get to make comment and they don't have to address it. So the city ceded its authority for its streetcar plan, and this is related to Brian's question too. The city ceded its authority for its streetcar plan while the downtown streetcar was under construction back in 2015, and it gave all of the authority to MARTA. Why that was done, I don't know, but I don't think it was the best decision. MARTA can be a operator, a contractor, or it can be the whole shooting match. And I think right now it doesn't have the oversight from the council, and it doesn't have the accountability to anyone else to build these things except in the media and in the public eye. That's about the extent of it. And what we would hope for is greater accountability and greater responsiveness and a greater buy-in, frankly, from MARTA to the idea that, you know, they have a real opportunity to get huge PR benefit if they would stand over there and say, today, we're taking the first steps to building this remarkable project. We've got a long way to go and there are obstacles, but we're here to announce that today is the beginning. I mean, I think everybody would not just breathe a sigh of relief, but shout, shout and say, hooray, let's get going. And I think they would find a lot of understanding and support for the idea that the general public does understand challenges, does understand difficulty, but they're not used to sharing them. That meeting they've called tomorrow, I think, is a result of the pressure that we and others have applied to ask them for more transparency and greater accountability for the schedule of this. I mean, this is part of our regional transportation plan. It is an official document filed with the federal government, with the FTA. It's not a secret. It is the plan. So why not get on with it? Those are questions I'd like to know the answers to as well.
So one small follow-up question, ask somebody who's running for council and ask someone who's talked with council members extensively about this. What is the ask of Beltline Rail now of sitting council members and people running for these seats as far as what you mentioned, oversight and accountability and how to push this forward? What would the ask be? We're asking you to be champions of the project that the city has already decided to do, and to hold MARTA accountable to an accelerated schedule to deliver this. The 3 years is not an arbitrary number we made up. It's a number that we arrived at in consultation with experts, with people at ABI and elsewhere. How fast could you build this project from the state of shovel readiness that it is right now? It's not quite shovel ready, meaning you couldn't go out there tomorrow and start building. It needs the final engineering. It needs the alignment. It needs the rest of the site survey. Let's hear from MARTA what else it needs to get ready, and let's see how fast they can do it. What we're concerned about is that the extension from the 4th Ward to Ponce City Market is being sort of held in abeyance until they figure out every other detail about the project that they want to know. And if light rail remains the preferred alternative, as MARTA spokesperson Colleen Kiernan said the other day, then why not get on with it? And the city council can say that to MARTA. And it can say that it would view things unfavorably if there was further delay
to implementing this project. And as Brian also opted, do we have to have MARTA do this? What the city giveth, the city could taketh away. And that includes the intergovernmental agreement for MARTA to be the implementer of the project. Now, the city went to MARTA. MARTA is the regional transit agency with 50 years of experience, as they have pointed out. They're the only people who've really successfully built transit, but that's a long time ago, the last time they did. We're more than 20 years since they built anything. And if MARTA wants
from North Springs.
Excuse me?
Yeah, the North Springs is about 20 years.
That's right. North Springs was the last mass transit rail that MARTA built. And if they don't want to build this, let's find out if they want to operate the system that we built. You know, that I think that's where it sits. We had a candidate forum last summer for District 57, and Alex Wan, who sat on the city council, whom you know, Liliana, and who many of you might know, he said, why don't we take back some of the authority we ceded to MARTA so that we can make sure the project happens on a reasonable timeline? I'm not saying we should do that yet. I'm saying the ideal situation would be that MARTA wants to accelerate its timeline.
Well, I say, I'm sorry, Miss Emma was first.
Go ahead, Emma.
Real quick, Matthew, thank you for answering my question. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and
I'll
Liliana,
stop.
I think I'll just say one more thing. What you can do is what you're doing. Talk about it. Keep it in the media. Keep it on the front burner. The minute it goes to the back burner, we lose the pre-momentum that the next city council and next mayor will inherit from this election. An election is a time when people get together and talk about ideas.
Well, I can guarantee you that you can count on me to keep talking about it and keeping it at the forefront, without a doubt.
Awesome.
So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Matthew. I have a couple questions. One, well, really both of them are very related to the elections and city council's powers. The first one, though, might be a tricky. The second question is going to be real easy to answer. First one's a little trickier, but as someone who works in the Old Fourth Ward every day, and I think, you know, a lot of people on the call, it's no secret that the Beltline and MARTA do not work well together. You know, for whatever reason, even trying to get a stakeholder meeting where both groups are in the same room, and as a community, you know, when we ask, hey, we, you know, want to work with you guys, or we want to collaborate with you as a community to get something done, it just seems so difficult. And I don't, you know, understand why these groups don't work well together. I'm sure you have more historical knowledge. I'm not really concerned about the politics there, but as we move forward, how can members of the communities that are being impacted by this dysfunctional relationship between these two very important organizations in our city, how can we, you know, hold these organizations accountable to work better together? I mean, I don't know what the issue is, but or how does city council change that? Because if MARTA is going to be the organization that implements this, and I'm not, you know, I'm just basing this off of things I've heard, but it seems like a lot of the delays is just this inability for the organizations to work together, and I don't know how we get past that.
I think there's an answer. That's a great question. And I think there's an answer to your question. The question is really, how does the council find the voice that will be heard, that represents the collective interest and desire of the people who elected it? And it is going to require a little bit of courage, but it's also going to require that we have their back when they exhibit it. The chair of the Transportation Committee and the chair of the Community Development Committee have both been before you before. Andre Dickens and Matt Westmoreland are great folks. And if they spoke with one voice and definitively issued a statement about what the city wants to see, I think not only would they find support on the council, they'd find support from most of us. And so far that hasn't happened because there's been a lot of debate behind the scenes over all kinds of things. But we really think that the time is now It would be a tremendous waste of an opportunity. I mean, none of us here on this call is a transit expert or works in the field, at least to my knowledge. If someone does, great for you, and thanks for the service towards that. But it seems like we're all just ordinary people who are interested in this issue. But that's what democracy is about. It's about us coming together, talking about things, coming to an understanding, deciding what we want, and then making it an issue in the next election, talking about it, making sure it's not silent, and then voting for people who support our point of view. And in the meantime, holding the people we've already elected accountable. Just because it's an election doesn't mean they can't continue to lead. So I think this is the perfect time to step out. So I know that you guys are probably the best organized business association in the city for a neighborhood or a district, and maybe only Buckhead would rival you. And I might say you have more citizen participation than they do. But for you to issue a letter to your elected representatives that touch your district, to those running for office, and say, join us, I think would make a powerful statement. To issue a press release, to share it with media, to say that you want something and you want it done because it's impacting your livelihoods. Think of the business impact that more connectivity would have for the Old Fourth Ward.
Yeah. Well, my quick follow-up question that is directly related to this is whether Beltline Rail now will be creating some type of report card or other, information to make it easy for voters to know as we go into these likely very contested elections, kind of where the candidates are standing on this issue.
Oh, that's another excellent question. And here's where we are with that, Emma. The idea of holding candidates accountable through a scorecard on this issue so that voters can see where they stand and the nuances of that is something we're going to do. We're going to call it a transit scorecard, and we're going to make it as fair and objective as possible. And part of what we've been doing behind the scenes since January is briefing incumbents and candidates on our funding blueprint and on our plans for advocating for Beltline Rail and asking for them to be champions and to join us in that call. As you know, some people are going to qualify for office by August, and we don't know the full list yet, but we do have an idea of who the players are going to be, so we can begin that process before. It's a very short time between the end of August and November. It's an unusually short time. So we're going to have to get started on that during the summer. We're also going to have candidate forums virtually, if not in person. We'll see where we are in the pandemic by August, July, and when people begin to focus intensely on the election. So both those things, a scorecard and actual events. And Brian, if there is no one else, I'll let you have the last question because we're past our hour and I want to be respectful of people's time.
Okay, so so I'm pretty sure we've done all the studies, right? As far as, we figure out which one is which transit option is the best for our neighborhood. Yeah, because I'm in Capitol View, I'm along the Beltline too. So it looks like some of the infrastructure's already been built for a train. This something in, So I guess what my question is do we tell them what's already been done to help them move along further? And I know we said we already found, are we looking at other options just in case that MARTA doesn't budge?
So, well, MARTA's not saying they won't build it. MARTA's not saying they will build it. That MARTA is kind of kicking the can a little bit, we think here. And we hope that's the case. But what I want to say about, I think you've raised an excellent point, and that people don't all widely understand. Every place that ABI has built the trail, they have prepared the alignment for light rail, because light rail is the preferred alternative. What does that mean? Even though there's no track bed there, that fallow area where the light rail will go is designed for stormwater runoff based on light rail. It's designed for bridges to either be reused or replaced. It's designed for the 1 or 2 tunnels to either be reused or added to. So there is preparatory work. Utilities are relocated as they build the trail, and they will not have to be relocated again when light rail is installed. If you remember the installation of the lighting on the northeast section of the Beltline and how long that took, is because they hadn't done that. They hadn't thought in the beginning that they would be lighting that. And so they didn't have all that work done, but they have done the work that's preparatory for light rail. So that is something we can say to people. To do anything else, that means redoing all of that. And as far as vehicle choice, I don't think that autonomous vehicles are quite there yet as a mass transit solution for the number of people that need to be moved by transit on the Beltline, and that could be with the density that mass transit can support. So really it came down to light rail or BRT. And BRT is going to be a really important part of the transit mobility future of Atlanta, and so will autonomous vehicles one day. But for the Beltline, light rail is the best solution. I mean, in order, if what we want is still what we said we want, and I'm going to leave us with this, which is a greenway, a linear park with art, with people, just think about the dust that buses kick up when you're beside them on a street. Even if they're electric buses, those tires still kick it up, and you're on the Beltline breathing that dust. A steel-wheeled light rail vehicle will not do that. And so I think in answer to your question, what we have to do is keep educating. We have to keep saying, I'm for this. And we have to get our elected leadership. I think this is the critical thing, to say it. And those running for office like Liliana and Jason Dozier and others who have expressed support for the idea, not just lately, but for a long time, they can shift the conversation, and they can, if elected, become that solution on council. In less than 9 months, we will have a new city council, and we will still be talking about this because this is a long-term and big infrastructure project, the biggest kind of infrastructure of a city has ever attempted. So I'm
sorry, I know we gotta go. So how much is saved? So how much do we need to raise in order to, so I was saying, maybe if we come, maybe say for example, I'm just throwing something out there, wishful thinking, hey, we saved about $300 million. What, what I'm saying, when we present this, I'm just saying, what will happen? I'm just giving a scenario, just brainstorming.
So I think what you're asking is, what is this whole project going to cost? To build the first extension, I'd say we don't need to raise any money at all unless MARTA has already spent the $250 million we've given them, or is banking it for another reason, because the streetcar extension and Beltline rail to Ponce City Market from Old Fourth Ward by Ebenezer Baptist Church is projected to cost about $150 million. And we've raised over $250 million in more MARTA tax already. So that's not a huge lift to do that. It's really about will for that one. The entire Beltline, including the 4 infill stations, we projected the cost to be about $2.5 billion. And that does require other pots of money. And to get in front of our Congresswoman, Nikema Williams, and say to her, we want this. When you are doing an earmark in that infrastructure bill, put $1 billion in for the Atlanta Beltline. And, that's a realistic ask.
Okay.
And so I'm in the 5th district. Representative Williams is my congresswoman. I plan to write her as an ordinary citizen as well as chair of this group. A lot of the Beltline is in the 5th district. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And
Yeah, because I'm in the 5th district.
right.
So, I mean, or council and District 12. Okay.
She and Secretary Buttigieg have a good relationship. She and City Councilman Matt Westmoreland have a good relationship. This is all connected. And the time is now. The time is this next 6 months, even before the election, to get into that infrastructure bill. And I think that, Liliana, I see you still on the call. I think that even as a candidate, you can have an influence on that before you are elected.
Cool.
So Emma, I want to say thank you again to you and to those who you invited to join us. We've recorded this and we will make the recording available on our website so that perhaps those of you who could not stay inside on Earth Day, as much as it is, will be able to view this later.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks again. Good evening, everyone.